Welcome to Conflict Resolution, SOC 350 and Unit 1. This is Dr. Moore. Who do you have the most conflict with right now? Your answer to this question probably depends. If you still live at home with a parent or parents, you may have conflicts with your family as you try to balance your autonomy or desire for independence with the practicalities of living under your family's roof. If you've recently moved away to go to college, you may be negotiating roommate conflicts as you adjust to living with someone that you may not know at all. You probably also have experiences managing conflict in romantic relationships and in the workplace. So think back and ask yourself, how well do I handle conflict? As with all areas of communication, we can improve. And that may be one of the reasons you've decided to take this course. When we think of conflict in simple terms, we think of a struggle between people, or between groups, or organizations, or cultures, or nations. Conflict involves opposing forces pulling in different directions. Many people believe that conflict is disruptive, causes stress, and should be avoided. In reality, it can be a catalyst for positive change. While conflict can be uncomfortable, it is not unhealthy, nor is it necessarily bad. An important question we address in this course is not how can we avoid conflict and eliminate change, but rather how can we manage conflict and produce positive change. Wilmot and Hocker defined interpersonal conflict as an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. We'll break down this definition in just a minute. Conflict arises from differences. It occurs whenever people disagree over their values, motivations, perceptions, ideas, or desires. Sometimes these differences look trivial, but when a conflict triggers strong feelings, a deep personal and relational need is at the core of the problem. A need to feel safe and secure, a need to feel respected and valued, or a need for greater closeness and intimacy. Conflict is seldom simple. Along with what is observed on the outside or what the conflict is about, there are additional layers involving each party's perception of the conflict and of each other. Ironically, the content issue is what gets a lot of attention when we argue, but the perceptual issues are there nonetheless. Wilmot and Hocker observed that the basis for understanding any conflict situation is to recognize the importance of those perceptions. When we're in a struggle with someone, we may perceive that each of us has different goals, or that the scarce resources for which we are competing are limited so much so that one person's gain will be the other's loss. Moreover, we also sometimes perceive that our opponent in the conflict is trying to prevent us from attaining our goal. Our perceptions during a conflict then come down to seeing the other person as being to blame, and so we play the blame game. What happens when we see the other person as being at fault in a conflict is namely our emotional responses intensify, and we typically lash out, accusing the other of being selfish, irrational, naive, and controlling. Playing the blame game makes us blind to the other things going on in a conflict situation. We see our side of the conflict with great clarity, often insisting that our view makes complete sense. But we don't see the perspective of the other person and how it may also make sense. Our biggest blind spot, moreover, may be that we can't see how we are also responsible for the conflict situation. Instead, we fall into the trap of arguing over who is right and who is wrong. In order to get beyond the deadlock over who is right, individuals in a conflict need to listen to one another's perspectives. This may entail recognizing the ways in which both individuals are right. Moreover, to be able to truly understand another person's perspective, we need to be willing to listen to another's perspective and acknowledge the validity of both perspectives. Often, though, people may not be aware of their own needs. If you are out of touch with your feelings or so stressed that you can only pay attention to a limited number of emotions, you won't be able to understand your own needs. If you don't understand your deep-seated needs, you'll have a hard time communicating with others and staying in touch with what is really troubling you. For example, couples often argue about petty differences, the way she hangs the towels, the way he parts his hair, rather than what is really bothering them. My wife and I recently had a conflict over the lettuce in a sandwich. In personal relationships, a lack of understanding about differing needs can result in distance, arguments, and even breakups. In workplace conflicts, differing needs are often at the heart of bitter disputes. When you can recognize the legitimacy of conflicting needs and become willing to examine them in an environment of compassionate understanding, it opens pathways to creative problem solving, team building, and improved relationships. In addition to perception, interpersonal communication is key to successful conflict resolution. Let's go back to our definition of conflict and break it down. First, conflict is an expressed struggle. It is the result of opposing forces coming together. For example, there's a conflict when a leader and a senior level employee oppose each other on whether or not all employees have to work on weekends. Similarly, conflict occurs when a school principal and a parent disagree on the type of sex education program that should be adopted in a school system. In short, conflict involves a clash between opposing parties. And conflict always contains an affective element, or the felt part. It is expressed emotionally. Conflict is an emotional process that involves the arousal of feelings in both parties of the conflict. When our beliefs or values on a highly charged issue are challenged, we become upset and feel it is important to defend our position. When our feelings clash with others' feelings, we are in a conflict. I like this picture because it demonstrates the avoidant style of managing conflict. And there it is. Secondly, there needs to be an element of interdependence between parties for conflict to take place. If leaders could function entirely independently of each other and their subordinates, there would be no reason for conflict. Everyone could do their own work, and there would be no areas of contention. However, leaders don't work in isolation. Leaders need followers, and followers need leaders. This interdependence sets up an environment in which conflict is more likely. On a more personal level, when two parties are interdependent, they're forced to deal with questions such as, how much influence do I want in this relationship? And how much influence am I willing to accept from the other person? Questions like these, because of our interdependence, cannot be avoided. In fact, the authors of our text contend that these questions permeate most conflicts. Next, conflict involves differences between individuals that are perceived to be incompatible. As we mentioned earlier, perception is a very important part of this process. It can involve incompatible goals, and this presupposes that there has to be a winner and a loser. The perceptions can involve scarce resources or thinking that there's not enough of something to go around. In other words, someone is going to come up short. And there can be perceived interference from others. This means someone is blocking you from reaching your goal. And usually this is seen as the other party. The opportunities for conflict are endless because each of us is unique with particular sets of interests and ideas, and these differences are a constant breeding ground for conflict. In summary, all these elements are critical ingredients in interpersonal conflict. And to further understand the intricacies of managing conflict, we'll take a brief look at some conflict management styles. The purpose of the pre-class assignment was to help you identify your preferred conflict management style, and also to recognize the importance of context on the specific situation in determining what style you choose. Would you describe yourself as someone who prefers to avoid conflict, or do you like to get your way? Are you good at working with someone to reach a solution that's mutually beneficial? Odds are that you've been in situations where you could answer yes to each of these questions. Yes, I want to get my own way. Or yes, I want to avoid conflict. Or yes, I'm good at reaching a compromise with someone. These questions underscore the important role that context plays in handling conflict and in conflict resolution. The way we view and deal with conflict is learned and contextual. The way we handle conflicts may be similar to the way our parents handle conflict. It really wasn't until my late 20s and early 30s that I began to see how similar I am to my parents, even though I, like many of you, spent years trying to separate or distinguish myself from them. Research does show that there is intergenerational transmission of traits related to conflict styles. If a child has observed and used negative conflict resolution styles with siblings or parents, he or she is likely to exhibit these behaviors with non-family members. Now, the 5 strategies for managing conflict that we'll look at briefly are competing, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, and collaborating. An interesting way to understand the 5 strategies for managing conflict is to put them on a graph in terms of concern for self versus concern for other. And you can see it here on the left. It ranges from low to high concern for self, and on the top from low to high concern for other. The competing style indicates a high concern for self and a low concern for other. When we compete, we're striving to win the conflict, potentially at the expense or loss of the other person. Now, this strategy may involve coercion or aggressive communication. Now, competing has been linked to aggression, although the two are not always paired. The competing style of conflict is not the same thing as having a competitive personality. Competition in relationships isn't always negative, and people who enjoy engaging in competition may not always do so at the expense of the other person's goals. In fact, research has shown that some couples engage in competitive shared activities like sports or games to maintain and enrich their relationships. The avoiding style of conflict management often indicates a low concern for self and a low concern for other, and no direct communication about the conflict takes place. However, we should note that in some cultures there is an emphasis on group harmony over individual interests. And indirect strategies of hinting and joking also fall under the avoiding style. While these indirect avoidance strategies may lead to a buildup of frustration or even anger, they do allow us to vent a little of our built-up steam and may make a conflict situation more bearable. When we hint, we drop clues that we hope our partner will find and piece together to see the problem and hopefully change, thereby solving the problem without any direct communication. In almost all cases of hinting that I've experienced, the person dropping the hints overestimates their partner's detective abilities. The accommodating conflict style indicates a low concern for self and a high concern for other, and is often viewed as passive or submissive, in that someone complies with or obliges another without providing personal input. The context and motivation behind accommodating play an important role in whether or not it is an appropriate strategy. Now, in general, we accommodate because we're being generous, we are obeying, or we are yielding. Now, research has shown that the accommodating style is more likely to occur when there are time restraints and less likely to occur when someone does not want to appear weak. The compromising style shows a moderate concern for self and other and may indicate that there is just a moderate investment in the conflict and/or the relationship. Even though we often hear that the best way to handle conflict is to compromise, the compromising style isn't a win-win solution. It's a partial win, partial lose solution. In essence, when we compromise, we give up some of what we want. It's true that the conflict gets resolved temporarily, but lingering thoughts of what you gave up could lead to a future conflict. Compromising may be a good strategy when there are time limitations or when prolonging a conflict may lead to relationship deterioration. And a negative of compromising is that it may be used as an easy way out of a conflict. The collaborating style involves a high degree of concern for self and other, and usually indicates investment in the conflict situation and the relationship. Although the collaborating style takes most of the work in terms of communication, it ultimately leads to a win-win situation in which neither party has to make concessions because a mutually beneficial solution is discovered or created. The obvious advantage is that both parties are satisfied, which could lead to positive problem solving in the future and strengthen the overall relationship. In conclusion, I want to remind you that this presentation is merely meant to supplement your careful reading and studying of the assigned chapters. And I want to say I'm looking forward to our journey in this course as we learn more about conflict and our approaches to conflict. I'm certainly looking forward to our discussions about our views on this subject. While we'll be looking at the latest research on conflict resolution, we'll also realize that successfully managing conflict is an art. It involves creativity and finding new perspectives. And as Chapter 1 points out, conflict management also involves developing our emotional intelligence, or being able to recognize our own feelings and those of others, and managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships.